there's not going to be enough drinking water for the whole world. Now, I won't be around in 2050, but I know that the young people will be, and their children and their grandchildren. They say that water is being privatized at a faster rate than ever before, which means what? It means that a natural resource like water is being commoditized. So only the rich people will be able to afford it, the poor people won't be able to afford it. And they say that the wars that will be fought towards the end of the 21st century will be about water. So this is a very big consideration. You can't think about your future, you can't design your future without thinking about some of these things. Food insecurity. There are a lot of people, there's enough food being grown to feed 7 billion people. But obviously there are people who are very, very hungry and are going without food for a number of reasons. Most of it is systems failure, and some of it has to do with climate change, and a lot of it has to do with privatization, it has to do with globalization in terms of countries not being able to feed their people because they're not allowed to stockpile. This is an Indian consideration, by the way. India fought and successfully won the right to stockpile its food because it is so agriculture dependent that it said to the World Trade Organization, in times of drought, we have to have the food to feed our people. And stockpiling is against the rules of globalization because why? Because it distorts market forces. So these again are things that you need to be thinking about. You know, women spend a lot of time, they say that women and girls spend 200 million hours collectively just getting water from the river or the well. A great large majority of the world's population lives more than 30 miles away from their water source. So these are all things that are changing the world. These are all things that have implications not just for the poor people. These have implications for the young people who are starting out in this world and thinking about how they can experience personal growth and professional success. So, and you know, we have to be thinking about public health also, and it's not just for people who are thinking of becoming doctors. We have to think about public health as something that is quickly disappearing off the face of this earth. Again, we go back to globalization, where the government is supposed to draw back on its national policy space, draw back on its services, its free services, its government hospitals. You'll notice since the 1990s that schools and government subsidized hospitals have fallen into disarray. They don't have the latest diagnostic equipment. These are the only hospitals and schools that poor people have access to, or even lower middle class people, and they are not being served because of free trade treaties. So we have to think of a way to correct this imbalance if we want to have a just and equitable society, because a just and equitable society is a prerequisite for professional success and personal growth. The thing is that you cannot anymore say, I have mine, I'm fine, because you don't have yours. At least you won't have it for long. Because the forces of society, the forces of economic and social injustice now, in this time, in this place, are so great that they will take away what is yours. You cannot build a whole life, build a complete life, unless you look at everything broadly. You can't just channel, you know, in the old days it was all the boys went to IIT, became engineers, and went to America. And all the girls did their bachelor's or commerce, whatever that meant, and got married. you know, there was a path. It seemed like there was a path. Well, there isn't a path anymore. There are choices, and you have to make good choices. You have to understand the framework that I'm talking about, and you have to make choices based on that. So we talked about wealth distribution and the disparity. That's something else that we have to consider, because it's the old 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the population of the world owns 80% of the wealth. And that is a great imbalance. Gender inequalities, I can talk about this for days, but I won't. But women are disproportionately poorer, even in developed countries. Women make less money than men for the same job, the same qualification, same background, same experience. In America, women make 82 cents on the dollar. So I don't know what it is in India, but I'm sure there is pay inequity in India. Women, the effect of pay inequity gets magnified throughout your life, so that at the end of your life, your pension is smaller, your social security net is smaller, and sometimes you can't make ends meet. In places like Europe, in the Netherlands and in Finland and in Norway, we have associations, organizations, graduate women's organizations, and we are hearing about the inequity in pensions, and that the fact that women who had perfectly good jobs during their lifetime are now living on pensions that are not helping them make ends meet. So this is again something, especially for the women and the men in this audience, to think about, because this kind of inequity is unsustainable. It will draw, it not just makes certain people poor, but it makes the successful people less successful. You'll see that as you go through your life. So, of course, you know, I can't even begin to talk about rural India or rural world, because the situation is just so many times worse. Women, the women of the world, they plant the crops, in rural India and in the rural world, they plant the crops, they harvest the crops, they process the food, they sell the food, they feed the world. They make only 10% of the profit, and women own, globally, only 2% of the land. So there is a great discrepancy in rights, gender rights, which will ultimately be the undoing of all of us. So I don't mean to sound pessimistic, I just want to be realistic. This is the world. And I don't know how many of the young people have been thinking about this in terms of this. Because believe me, when you go for a job interview, you will be asked about the state of the world. And you need to talk about your place in the world and your understanding of the world. Okay, the degradation of I shouldn't skip over wars and conflicts. Only 11 countries in the world are free of conflict right now, or war. And most of the wars are about what? Either religion or natural resources. So it's a very serious problem when the UN says that 65 million people in the world are either refugees or they're internally displaced people. You have this problem, not this problem, but this issue in India also, with refugees coming across the border. Where are these people supposed to go? You have to absorb them, but then you have to hold your government accountable. Your government has to have a plan for the refugees, because refugees are not just impacted themselves, but they tend to impact the countries and the citizens that the country that they move into. Now in Europe, there is a big discussion about refugees and how refugees can be absorbed into the country, and the kinds of plans, national plans, that the country governments of the EU are making. So these are also the kinds of things that you should be investigating to see, because these are things that India is experiencing too. We can't just sit back and say, you know, refugees are a problem. They're not a problem, because these people have to go somewhere. And it behooves us to make plans rather than to sit around and complain about it. Degradation of the environment, we've talked. I feel as if I talk about it all the time. The natural resources are being depleted. The ocean, the Antarctic and the Arctic sea ice is depleted almost. Temperatures are rising. We have horrendous events, catastrophic events like hurricanes and heat waves, and people are dying. Carbon dioxide concentrations are increasing. So, you know, this is the framework, this is the world, folks, that our young people are entering. And whether you realize it or not, young people, I keep pointing to the two of you because I see you there. And whether you realize it or not, this framework and these factors are impacting your daily lives. One day, when you are not so busy, take a moment and sit down and think about each of these things in the framework and draw sort of a graphic that you're in the center of it and all of these factors surround you. And think on any given day how much each factor impacts you. That is the only way to understand the world, because it's very easy to forget about the rest of the world and to concentrate on your life. But the fact of the matter is, we talked about it, we're connected now, and we need to do everything together. And development and the easing of social economic issues, social economic justice is more important now to work for than ever before. So, you know, I always say to students, stand in the middle of this framework and then think about your passion. Think about what it is you'd like to do, not what your parents want you to do, not what society wants you to do, but what do you want to do based on your perception of the world, your analysis of the world. You know, your parents, and I think you can explain this to your parents. This is not meant to dishonor your parents, but I think sometimes parents haven't lived through globalization. They haven't lived through the good effects and the bad effects. And I think that it's good for you to start a dialogue with your parents. You know, your father may want you to be a doctor, but you may want to be an activist who wants to save the whales. And I'm here to say that's a perfectly good thing, and that is your passion, and you can explain that to your parents. And it's not as if you have to live in poverty. You can work for an NGO, you can get paid a good sum of money, you are experiencing personal satisfaction, and you are connecting with the world, which always leads to the next step. Don't be isolated from the rest of the world. Connect with the world. So, you have to always ask yourself when you're thinking of passions, how can I be a good Indian citizen and how can I be a good global citizen? And what is it that I can design into my future that contributes to both things and makes me happy? What is it that I can do in my enlightened self-interest so that I'm doing good in the world, but I'm also benefiting from it? And then, you know, make a few tentative choices and commit to investigating the possibilities. I think that young kids, I don't know whether they are so overburdened with the work that they're doing, and then also the huge amount of time that they spend on social media, but I think that young people aren't looking for information. They're not building the kind of information they need to. So commit to investigating your options. And then, you know, the other thing that I say is become connected in a connected world in a way that is going to be of advantage to you. I mean, being connected on Facebook is fine, and passing comments about your friends' pictures is fine. But how about making your online presence work for you? How about writing a blog about the things that you're impressed about? How about reaching out, and a blog is a great way to reach out across the world. How about joining a peer networking platform. How about creating some alliances with corporations or NGOs? How about reading about how many of you, by the way, have read the Indian Constitution? You have? I'm just really pleasantly surprised. Okay, but I have to say that a lot of people didn't raise their hands. The Indian Constitution is the most rights-based constitution in the world of any country. It's based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And young people need to become familiar with it because they need to know what their rights are. And they need to consider these rights when they're designing their future. So become knowledgeable. Take leadership training skills. I mean, there's a lot of online stuff that's free. I don't know if you take courses online or you watch constructive YouTube videos as opposed to not such constructive YouTube videos. Also, do internships. Reach out to the people like MG Motors. I mean, they are the essence of corporate social responsibility, which is nothing more or less than enlightened self-interest. They are doing good in the community, but they're going to benefit from it too. Nothing wrong with that. And I think that you should be crowding for an internship with MG Motors. I'm sorry, now everyone's going to call you tomorrow. Yeah. So, you know, do things that are going to move you forward. Don't be isolated from the world. One of the best things you can do is follow the UN agenda. How many people in this room know what the Sustainable Development Goals are or have read them? See, now I'm pleasantly surprised again. The Sustainable Development Goals, for those of you who haven't read them, came after the Millennium Development Goals, and it is the biggest human development program in the world, and 193 countries, including India, have signed up to implement, to conceptualize that goal within the context of their country and to implement that goal. Become involved in that. You'll make great connections, and you'll also get a real idea of what it is you want to do and how is it. You know, you have to find, in this world that we live in, which is so different from the world we used to live in, where you were on a career path, this world that we live in, you have to find your path. So these are all ways in which you can find your path. You know, work for an NGO, either a in-country NGO or an international NGO. One of the biggest recommendations that I can make to you is become a member of an international organization that has consultative status with the UN. Why? Because that is your access to knowledge about the world, but also access to 193 countries, also access to youth programs, to career development programs. So if you join an international organization, and I'm not saying this just because I'm president of GWI, but yes, do join GWI. You know, you benefit from an international perspective. And as I said, we have to keep going back to the fact that we don't live in India. We may physically be located in India, but we are really living in global society, and it behooves us to take advantage of all the organizations that can put us in touch with things that are happening at the global level, things that will impact you and help you design your future. And, you know, I always say to young people, practice effective communications. I just think that, sorry young people, I don't mean to make a generalization, but I think that with texting and chat and all of the short forms, you know, LOL, I just found out it means laugh out loud. I mean, I was confused for a long time when my children were saying LOL, but with all of these short forms, we're losing the ability to think in a goal-oriented way and to express ourselves articulately, intelligently, knowledgeably, These are all things that are going to play a role in your future, believe it or not. And doing this is not helping at all. So, sorry to be looking at you again. But, and you know that in a global society, you're going to be working with people who are different from you. So it behooves you to understand culture and value and attitudes that are different from yours. So these are all things that you should be thinking of. And then the last point I want to make is that you have to understand, and I think faculty members have to encourage the transformative power of critical thinking. College is supposed to teach you about a given field, but one that you've chosen to specialize in, to major in. But college is also supposed to teach you to think critically. And if you ask the employers who are going to be employing you very soon, they'll say that they want their candidates to think critically, to think creatively, to think collaboratively, because it's all about collaboration too, folks. I mean, we just have been talking about how connected we are, so collaboration is going to play a big role in designing your future as well as in your work. So when you're thinking critically, you gather the information first about this framework that I've talked about, and then you review what you've learned, review the gaps in your understanding, explore these gaps, try to fill them, and build on your understanding. This is so important, this is so basic to your future. Make it your own, this understanding that an imbalanced society, an unjust society, a society that treats its women badly, a society that treats its poorest people badly, is not good for anyone. We are no longer separated from the people who are not as well off as we are. We're all one. And if they don't do well, you're not going to reach your potential. So whenever you're thinking about your future, think about development, think about social and economic change that is good for society. I'm not saying that you should do charity work. We all know that we need to earn a living. But again, act in your own enlightened self-interest. Work towards preserving the planet, because it's not very good if you have a very good job that pays very well and there isn't a planet. So think about all these things. Think about the long-term consequences. And I always tell young people that the best way to start expressing themselves, to start formulating ideas in your head that you get